Ready for the main debate? Want to know what it is? You care. You want to know what it is? The title of this main debate is Chicago broke?
Yeah.
That's it. Yes. Thank you. Is Chicago broke? Solving the city's budgetary woes. There'll be two speakers up here to try to get to the bottom of this crazy question. One is John Nothdurft. He'll argue that Chicago should be more focused on core functions and drastic pension and spending reforms. He's been at the Heartland Institute since May 2008. He's been published in a lot of, I'm not going to read this whole thing. You don't care, do you? Do you want to hear the whole thing? He was born a poor child in Milwaukee. He's been the government relations director of the Heartland Institute since 2010. He's a member of the American Legislative Exchange Council's Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force. Boy, does that sound like fun. And has testified before multiple state legislatures on a wide range of issues. His work has been published in scores of publications, including the Chicago Tribune, Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Detroit News, Chicago Sun-Times, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Investors Business Daily. Before joining Heartland, he was a national press coordinator for Americans for Fair Taxation, one of the largest grassroots tax reforms organizations in the country. Debating Mr. Nothdurft is Tom Tresser, who I have known for roughly 30 years. That's him right there. He's trying to get an early edge here somehow. Tom has a newly published book over there on this very topic. It's only $10. I know you're all here for relatively cheaper books inside. Think about buying his book. It's at a table over there. He's going to argue that the way out of this unbelievable mess is through the elimination of waste due to something called corruption and through increasing revenues. He's a civic educator, public defender, founder of the Civic Lab and PIF Illumination Project. He organized and edited the newly released book. I mean, it is fresh off the presses. Chicago is not broke, funding the city we deserve. He's also co-leader of the No Game Chicago campaign that went to the IOC's international headquarters in Lausanne, Switzerland in 2009 to tell the IOC, no thank you. What do you think would be like if we were saying we're waiting for the Olympics? Oh, good Lord. Okay, boys, have at it. The pattern is Mr. Nothdurft gets 10 minutes, Mr. Tresser gets 10 minutes, Mr. Nothdurft then gets 5 minutes, and then Mr. Tresser gets 5 minutes, and then Mr. Nothdurft gets 5 minutes, then Mr. Tresser gets 5 minutes. It's a total of 40 minutes, and feel free to, this is debate. You're not going to get to heckle Hillary and what's his name when they start debating because it's going to be on television. So heckle away. Mr. Nothdurft, the stage is yours.
Thank you all for coming. A little too short for it.
Get a stretcher.
There you go. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate everyone coming out. It's great to celebrate free speech in a great American city like Chicago. I want to just kind of briefly talk a little bit.
Speak up, please.
Speak into your microphone.
Can you hear me better? Yeah. There we go. Good. So I want to just briefly talk a little bit about kind of my background, but kind of in just kind of where my head's at on these types of issues. So obviously the question is Chicago broke. Well, my background is fiscal issues. I've written about property taxes here in Chicago and Cook County, where we've seen property taxes increased 50% over the last 10 years. I've looked at the municipal crisis here in Chicago and the surrounding taxing districts. Actually, in Cook County alone, there's 518 different taxing districts, including 3 mosquito abatement districts. So that's just kind of where my head kind of comes around these. Obviously, working for a think tank, I spent a lot of time analyzing, researching, and looking at various different questions and trying to come up with the best possible answers for these questions. But as anyone, I haven't been able to find the answers to all the questions I've tried to ask. So, you know, there's a couple questions I've still not been able to figure out, like where the heck is Carmen Sandiego? Or who did, in fact, let the dogs out? And probably most importantly, what is Victoria's secret? Still trying to figure that one out. Oh, okay.
Get better jokes!
They use child labor, he says. That's the secret. So I want to look at what. So I guess what I'm trying to, what I want to look at. So the question is Chicago broke? Well, I'm here to say, simply put, that yes, it is broke, and we need to fix it. Otherwise, we're not going to have the great Chicago city that we have been come to join, to love and enjoy, with the great parks, the great libraries, and everything else that comes with living in a great American city. I have 3 points that I want to kind of focus on during this conversation. One is that Chicago has an unsustainable long-term debt problem. And eventually that's going to crowd out the core functions of government that we all do appreciate. Fire, sanitation, libraries, education, all these important things. So that's kind of point one that I'm going to look into. Number two is that revenues are not a problem. We actually have increased revenues throughout the years, and actually that the politicians' addiction to spending and what they spend things on is a problem. And third, and maybe even most importantly, is that entrepreneurs, workers, and families will continue to flee our city unless we address these fundamental problems. And then I'll probably go into kind of some of the solutions that I see in terms of how we can actually correct this fiscal ship and keep Chicago great. So part one, Chicago has a long-term debt problem. I think everyone pretty much knows this. I can't wait to hear what we hear on the other side about this. The Chicago Financial Report just came out earlier this month. They found that the total debt burden is $29 billion. That's actually an increase of $11 billion over the previous year. So even the city itself, according to their auditors, have said there's a lot of debt on the books. What does that actually mean? I mean, that's just a big number. Well, in terms of expenditures last year, the city of Chicago spent $11.5 billion, so it's about 2.5 times, or almost 3 times as much of the total spending in 1 year. So it's a significant amount of money. In addition to that, the Illinois Policy Institute actually looked at how much per household debt burden there is. So they took all the amount of debt that there is, they broke it down by household. And if you split that up, that would actually be $63,800 for every household in Chicago. That is your portion of Chicago's debt. That is more than the median household income in Chicago.
How much do they have coming in?
I will get to that. That's actually point two, so I will get there. Just last year alone, we spent $860 million just on the interest. Almost $1 billion just on interest. And we see the bad credit ratings. Moody's, we're now at junk bond status, which not only hurts us in terms of companies moving in and people looking to move here, but it also makes those interest payments even more. So we're definitely have a spending problem, especially the long-term debt liabilities. Part two, the revenues. As you mentioned, how much are we bringing in? That's a good question. Well, from 2005 to 2015, we actually increased spending in Chicago 112%, more than doubling the amount of revenue in the state. We also raised taxes over a dozen times over the last 5 years, including most recently a $700 million tax increase. In addition to that, we have the highest sales tax of any major city in the United States. We have the highest cigarette tax of any city in the United States. We have the 10th highest residential property taxes in the United States. So we have very high taxes. We have pretty strong revenues, even though we're losing people. So moving on, point three, which I think is very important, is entrepreneurs, workers, and families will continue to flee the city of Chicago if we don't right some of these financial problems. So the city has raised the cost of living due to taxes and on top of everything else. And as a result of that, we've actually seen declining population. Since In the U.S. Census in 2014 to 2015, just 1 year, we lost 80,000 residents to out-migration. So this is problematic in a lot of ways. One is they're also bringing with them their jobs or where they're going. They're bringing their incomes, which could have been here part of the tax base. So we're starting to pull away from some of our tax base. So the revenues, they're starting to not keep up with things because we're having people move their capital to other states. And I always see this migration actually getting worse. According to the New World Health, the city of Chicago lost 3,000 millionaires last year alone. That's 2% of all high-income earners in all of Chicago. So 3,000, that's 2% of all millionaires last year alone. It is a bad thing, actually, and I will get into why that's a bad thing. But to kind of go into further what that means kind of historically, that's the most of any city in the country and third most in the world. So we lost more millionaires as a city than any other city and the third most in the world last year.
Tax some more.
Tax some more, okay.
I don't get up a stay.
Well, so he said, is that debt or is that crime? Well, we do see that they're moving to states with lower incomes. States like Texas is the most prominent, and Florida. So I would say, yeah, I'm sure crime and corruption and all these other things has to do with it as well. But when you see this big debt burden over our heads, that is creating a huge disincentive for people who want to work here or live here, because they see that. They see taxes rising and all these different things as well. So, we had some people who said, let the millionaires leave. That's fine, except they do pay a huge portion of our taxes already. Well, and if you want to tax them more of them will likely leave, and then they'll have to pay even more. So, but what I will say, in 2000, the city of Chicago, African Americans who made $100,000 or more a year, we had the 7th highest percentage. That's a great thing. Since then, we have seen a decline in African Americans making over $100,000 a year in the city.
Is that because of taxes, or is that because they don't want to get shot anymore?
Well, I'm sure it's both things, but actually part of the survey did look into that, and they did say that the fiscal aspects to it was part of it. And they are moving to other more friendly states like Florida and Texas, so to that same point. Okay, sure. To summarize though, so we have, over the last 20 years, we have seen revenues double. So the amount of money we're bringing in has doubled. We've seen spending increase significantly. And we've seen population decrease. So we've actually lost 200,000 Chicago residents since 2000, between 2000 and 2010, the most of any major city. So what we can do is, what I would say is we cannot continue to kick the can down the road and not address these significant problems that we're facing. And we can't put all the burden, and I would say we're already putting too much burden on the back of hardworking Chicagoans by raising their taxes. As I said, we've raised taxes on Chicagoans 12 times in the last 5 years, and we still have deficits and debt. So we can't tax our way out of this situation. Chicago is broken, and we have to fix it, and we can't do it by taxing and spending more. So what should we do? I would say the only way that we can do is actually to be able to attract more people by creating a tax, regulatory, and business climate that attracts these people who create jobs and want to work here and want to innovate here. Members of the creative class, entrepreneurs, white people, black people, young people, old people, and even, yes, members of the 1%. Because with the 1%, you bring people who will pay huge amounts of taxes with them.
How many more jobs? I've got 3 and it's still not paying my bills.
So this includes, so what I would say is, what do we need to do? I think that first we need to reform unfunded liabilities. Without doing something to the long-term debt problems, we will continue to falter, and it will crowd out education spending and all these other things. What we also need to do, we need to eliminate barriers to entry, occupational licensing. We need to reduce those. We need to get rid of some of the fees. It costs $750 a year, or $50 just to open up a lemonade stand or a business here in Chicago. That's more than any state in Indiana. It costs $100. This is ridiculous. Why are we doing this to small businesses? We know the big businesses can afford that, but the small business can't afford that. We need to reduce those barriers to entry. We also need to eliminate corporate welfare. Why are we giving handouts to corporations? Film tax credits. All these different things. We need to eliminate these things. I know the other speakers are going to be talking about this, but I agree. We need to eliminate TIF districts. They are a handout by big politicians for their own favor. So we do need to eliminate those. I completely agree. We also need to create, probably most importantly, a tax and regulatory climate that will actually attract businesses, small and big. We don't need to keep doing this, well, Boeing says they're going to leave, or Sears is going to leave, so we need to throw special tax treatments towards them so that they stay. No, we need to create a tax and regulatory system that encourages growth here for companies that are already here and companies that want to come here. Without that, we will continue to be broke, and we won't be able to get out of this mess. So thank you very much.
Not to worry, he'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if the argument's against Chicago is broke. Listen to Tom Tresser tell you why and what we can do about it.
How we doing out there? All right, so my name is Tom Tresser. I call myself a civic educator and a public defender because the very word public is under attack in this country and in this city. Do you agree with me? Yes. All right. When I say public, you say public schools. You say public libraries. I say public, you say
parks.
Parks. I say public, you say
clinics.
Transportation. Exactly. These are the things that make a city great. These are the things that make a nation great. And my friends, they are under attack here in Chicago. All right. Well, the topic for today is Chicago broke? Well, witness this. Chicago is not broke. All right. So first, let me say that a budget is more than just figures on a piece of paper. A budget is a map for your future, especially a civic budget. It's also a scorecard for who's in and who's out. And my friends, in this city, we the people have been out for so long, I can't even count. And we're out, and the other guys are making out like bandits. Okay? So let's clarify about what we mean by Chicago's budget. Right here on this paper are all the units of government controlled by the mayor. So we're talking about all the money. The city of Chicago, $9 billion. Public schools, about $6 billion. The Park District, about $500 million. CHA, $1 billion. CTA, about $1.5 billion. City colleges, $696 million. TIF districts, $426 million, and special service areas, about $22 million. All in, we're talking $19.1 billion. Now, as my learned opponent mentioned, we also have to talk about debt and obligations. Debt for things we owe for the past, and obligations for things promised or contracted for the future. And right now, 31% of all the property taxes that we collect are being spent on debt. Now, the first thing I have to say is, can we trust these numbers that they're accurate? And I, for one, do not trust the city's reporting, and I call for an independent forensic audit on all aspects of the city's agencies, commissions, employees, and contracts. And when I say forensic audit, I mean someone from the FBI who can find mob money, right? Because that's what we're talking about here. So until we get that independent forensic audit, all the numbers are suspect. And we will look at official pronouncements with a huge grain of salt. Now, I've been collecting stories on Chicago corruption for years. I have a folder down there that's 6 inches thick, which is full of articles on corruption. right up to a few days ago when the Board of Education was caught fudging reports on school cuts. Experience has taught us not to trust City Hall when it comes to. And we have a book here called Chicago is Not Broke, Funding the City We Deserve. And the lead-off chapter is by Dick Simpson, a professor from UIC, who chronicles corruption. He's written a light summer reading book called Corrupt Illinois, Patronage, Cronyism, and Criminality. I highly recommend it. What's the point of this? It's because so much money has gone missing in the city that we really need to step back and find it. So, the Civic Lab has published the book, Chicago is Not Broke, and it's by major experts such as Dick Simpson, who break it down into 3 large buckets. And there's my helpful assistant, Merle, my wife, showing us the 3 buckets. Thank you, Merle. Bucket 1, money that's stolen from us. Money that we should not have had to spend, nor continue to spend. Money that's hidden from us. Hey, we know they're collecting it, we just can't find it. Right? Number 3, money that we are not collecting, but we should be. In bucket number 1, we have the aforementioned cost of corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, the cost of corruption is calculated by Professor Simpson and his colleague Thomas Gradell is $500 million every year. $500 million, the cost of corruption in Chicago, going back as far as you can count. Also, the cost of toxic bank deals for Chicago. So this is where we get into this debt that my esteemed opponent is talking about. We've been placed into a lot of toxic deals that we can't seem to get out of. However, when the mayor and the governor want to void the contracts with the workers and want to take away their pensions, that's a contract we can walk away from. But the contracts with these banks that are sticking us with hundreds of millions of dollars of debt every year are apparently invaluable and cannot be touched. And finally, bucket number 3, money that we're not collecting, but we should be. Now, in bucket number 2, money that's hidden from us, are the famous TIF districts that I've scoured the city for the last 3 years explaining this giant slush fund controlled by the mayor. All right, right now in Chicago's TIF districts sits $1.3 billion, $1.3 billion of property taxes. Now, if we flush just $1 billion of that, just flush those accounts out, that gives the city a one-time bump of $843 million. We could use that money, couldn't we? Okay, how can we be broke? $183 million is ready there, sitting in accounts right this minute. And if we ended TIFs, blew them up completely, we'll have another $422 million coming to the city each and every year. Now, bucket number 3 is the bucket that's the most challenging for us. It includes revenues that we're not collecting, but we should be. Number 1, a progressive income tax for the state of Illinois. We have the most progressive income tax in the country. Very few states are worse than us. And what that means is the poor people pay relatively more. It's not fair, which means that the richest are getting away without paying their fair share. The second idea is a financial transaction tax on LaSalle Street. Hey, you go into the store and you buy a can of soda, you pay a tax. You buy a loaf of bread, you pay a tax. But these gamblers down on LaSalle Street who flush a quadrillion, that's zeros from here to the end of the street, no tax. Is that right? No, it's not right. And finally, in our bucket number 3, a public bank for Chicago. Let's have a bank that works for us, not screwing us. All right, now we got to get hold of all those 3 buckets. And so our authors have collectively put together these ideas for you, and they have added up to $9.8 billion of waste. $9.8 billion of waste, and we propose for you $5.5 billion in new, sustainable, progressive revenues every year going forward if we enact these ideas. These are revenues that are not wrenched from the least of us. So, get the book here today, special price, $10 for all you boogers. So, we need an independent audit. I've established that, and I think you agree with me. But we need to take a stuffed stand on every contract, loan, and consultant agreement and payout that the city's involved with. We want our menu of revenue ideas implemented before there's one more cent in property tax hikes, red camera ripoffs, regressive fees, or any basic services, and other scams cooked up by the mayor who wants to sell Midway Airport or anything like that. No selling of our public assets or privatizing essential services. Until these things are done, my friends, you cannot say Chicago's broke.